then I'll share my screen. There we go. So welcome to edition 2 of the Leadership Academy Book Club, talking about Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. Last week, we talked about systems and what they are. We talked about 1 and 2 stock systems, what stocks are and what flows are and how that feeds into systems. We covered a little bit about resilience, self-organization, hierarchy, and there's a bunch of notes here. If you're curious to what happened, there is a recording here from last week on YouTube that is in the Miro board, so you can watch it there, and some of the notes we took. And today, we're going to continue with systems traps and opportunities, and looking at what systems traps are and how they work with systems. And the book suggests ways out of these traps too, which are really interesting, I think. And we will be covering the systems traps of policy resistance, tragedy of the commons, drift to low performance, escalation, competitive exclusion, shifting the burden to the intervener, rule beating, and seeking the wrong goal. Maybe not as in-depth into all of those, but we'll cover the ones that whoever is here is interested in. And then maybe we'll finish a little bit with about how can systems thinking be relevant to Catalyst. And I think some people have been dropping notes in here, so that's really great. So we can look at those and see what people have been thinking about. And yeah, so let's jump in. Just curious, last time we had about a 50-50 split between those who had actually read the book versus those who came because they're interested in the book. Did you get a chance to catch up, Nin?
I am on chapter 5.
Okay.
Right now. So I think I'm just before the traps, but I have the book that I'm posted, the PDF. Just Google. So I'm gonna follow along in a chat.
Okay. Awesome. And Sebastian and Tegain, have you guys had a chance to look at the book yet?
Sorry, I don't have read the book yet, but I'm gonna catch up.
Okay.
The thing.
Yeah, so I'm
halfway
barely
through
getting into
it.
the traps.
I'm halfway through it.
Yes, I'm very interested in the theme, in the systems thing, and how the systems can enhance a purpose around the purpose. I'm very interested in the topic.
All right. So it sounds like everyone has at least some part of the book read, which is awesome. And yeah, so reviewing last week's materials, if you're still not up to the systems traps levels, there's a lot of information there. We talked about what systems are and how they work. But jumping in today, there's a lot of systems traps. And how would you guys like to discuss them? Do you have any that jump out to you that you want to start with? Or do you just want to kind of wander through them? One thing I think that might be interesting is to look at systems trap through the lens of Catalyst and how they might be manifesting there, and maybe looking at the way out sections that are listed here and maybe see if we're doing the right things to get out of those traps, or if we're doing the wrong things and deepening those traps. I think would be an interesting conversation.
I'd love to talk about the tragedy of commons if possible, because just to learn more about it, because it relates to like open source development and what I'm personally working on with the quadratic Rhodium funding and others. And then competitive exclusion would be interesting as well, because you know the topic as it relates to Catalyst as well, right? Because the topic of collaboration versus competition comes up a lot,
Mhm.
right? Hesitancy to support and collaborate with somewhat competitive projects in an environment that's hyper innovative.
Yeah, okay. Hold on, Dan Kimball's trying to join, but he's just joining the main room and it's empty for him. So I'm gonna help guide him to the
Gotcha.
breakout here.
Cool. See you soon.
I just need to do it in chat.
The link on my calendar wasn't also working, so I had to go to Discord and to get back here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like the meetup link has drifted a bit. And yeah, my calendar takes me to the wrong meeting as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay, he's here. And I'm pulling Dan in. Okay, now we can get started. So those are great suggestions, Nin. Those are also kind of the ones that I had thought would be interesting and relevant, possibly. So we can do that. Welcome, Dan. Glad you could join us.
Hold on.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan.
All right.
Hi
So,
there.
Jan, just to catch you up today, we're talking about the book Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And we started last week and had a conversation around systems themselves and systems thinking. And today we're continuing the conversation with systems traps and the opportunities highlighted in the book. And just to get a gauge where you are, have you read the book? Or are you here just out of curiosity on this systems thinking?
Who are you asking?
Dan, you.
Oh no, I've read the book. I've been involved in that kind of thing for a while. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Then look forward to your contributions here. So we were just talking about the different systems traps that were listed in the book and which ones the group might be interested in talking about, especially how they might relate to Catalyst. And Nin has brought up, maybe start with the tragedy of the commons and then move to the success to the successful, or listed here, competitive exclusion. So why don't we start? Tragedy of the commons. Does everybody know what that is? So the tragedy, let me mute Dan really quick, is where there's a commonly shared resource. And the one that's often used is like a common field where a bunch of sheep farmers bring their flocks to feed the sheep. And there's definitely a source there, which is the field. And then the outflow is how fast the sheep eat the grass. And the feedback mechanism there is very slow or very weak. And that affects the decisions of the individual participants. So if one farmer says, oh, look at this giant field, I'm going to add one more sheep to my flock. That might be okay for a while, but if every farmer does that, pretty soon they start to overgraze and worse, maybe eat the grass to a level where it starts to die. And then that resource starts to shrink because the grass itself is dying and not replenishing anymore. So the flow starts to slow down and the stock drops. And that's kind of the tragedy. There's not enough feedback to allow the farmers to make informed decisions based on what they see. And that's kind of the tragedy of the commons. And they talk here very quickly about the way out is to educate and exhort the user so they understand the consequences of abusing the resource. And then also strengthening or restoring a feedback mechanism if it's not there, either by privatizing the resource. So each farmer gets a certain place. So if you overuse it, you immediately see the impact of that. Or by regulating the access to the resource. So that's kind of what we see normally is regulation kind of popping up that limits the size of flocks and things like that. So that's kind of the tragedy of the commons. How do you think that would apply to Catalyst? And you started talking about a little bit about that. And then did you have any initial thoughts to kick us off?
Yeah, I was thinking more from the open source perspective, but from Catalyst perspective, I'm thinking, you know, the common resource that we have is the funding, for example, that's provided by Catalyst. So I think in Fund 8 it was 60 million or something like that, right? And anyone can just go and essentially ask for proposal, make a proposal and ask for a portion of that funding. It is, you know, permissionless. That's the beauty of Catalyst as well, right? But then it does create friction, right? And need for like some governance and some regulations and some processes to appropriately distribute this common resource to parties that are participating, such as the CA or VCA process, right? Such as voting system. Yeah, but you know, it is a finite resource at the same time, right? It's not like we have more proposals, then we're gonna have more funding. There's no like direct link, right? Supposedly, the more people we can bring to Catalyst, right, and more participation and higher quality, we have. I assume that the appetite to increase this common resource will be higher and higher. But we also don't know. I didn't join the Treasury after town hall, but we also don't know what are the mechanisms that grow this common resource pool, right? Does our increased participation or do these additional regulations, right, increase the funding or not? And if it doesn't, then just increase participation and more regulations. You know, how do they increase or decrease the value of the common resource, or AKA public good, right?
I think
I just want to ask, would education work in Catalyst in this respect?
Yes, one of the solutions that the book mentioned was educate and extort, right? Help people to see consequences of unrestrained use of the commons. In this case, would be the unlimited funding, not unlimited, but limited Catalyst funding, right? And appeal to their morality, right? Persuade them to exercise temper, even constraint in some cases, and also have effective like social disapproval or even mechanisms to discourage bad actors. The book calls them trespassers, right? People who essentially, overuse the common pool. And that kind of takes me to, one idea where I mentioned, like, as a proposer, a lot of proposers, they just ask for what is polite, right? Not actually what they need. So it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe we could talk about that. I think that, like, I wanted to talk a little bit about rule beating, where rules to govern a system can lead to rule beating, which is perverse behavior that gives the appearance of obeying the rules or achieving the goals, but actually distorts the system. And it's really about people working maybe within the letter of the law, but not the spirit of it. And that, I think, goes back to the commons, like people who put in a huge number of proposals that they may never have the ability to actually fulfill, in a hope that some of them get funded, rather than putting all their eggs in one basket, or other behavior that we can see happening, or even in the CA space, where people do like 8,000 CA reviews, and how is that even possible? And are they cheating in some way, or are they just super productive? But it gives the appearance that there is some system distortion happening at the edges, if you look at those kind of curves and what the average things are. And I think one thing you mentioned there, at least for me, is like polite. I think that's a key word, is like, when somebody goes into a challenge setting that's $100,000 and the proposal asks for $100,000, is that cool? Is that okay? It may be the best proposal in the world, but now you're crowding out everybody else and you're taking the entire commons for yourself. And our current rule system allows for that, but is that, again, polite, or is it like fair? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that kind of stuff too.
Yes, I was thinking about what kind of resources can be in play in the framework of Catalyst. I don't have clarity about that, but as Nin and you named, the disposition of the spirit of the persons can be so caveat for those actors that make many proposals or make many evaluations in the situation of the CAs. It can be very, very dangerous for the spirit of Catalyst. The disposition of people to collaborate and support the purpose of Catalyst can be diminished for those actors, I think. Because, for example, in my case, I note as a CA, for example, the number of evaluations, like around numbers of 800. But the situation in which a normal CA, an honest CA, or a very, very compromised CA, make around 60 or 70 evaluations, for example. And finally, in the final results, only 20 or 30 or 20 max results in the final compilation of evaluations, and that is terrible for the experience of being a CA. And that's the case, no? I think.
And the book talks about the way out of rule beating is design or redesign the rules to release creativity, not in the direction of beating the rules, but in the direction of achieving the purpose of the rules. I think that's interesting. Like, how do we change the system so all this energy that's being put in to do thousands of CA reviews or putting in hundreds of proposals could actually be redirected to improve the ecosystem and unleash that creativity? Because there's obviously a certain amount of drive and creativity going on to do that massive amount of work in whatever form it is. But I wonder if there are ways of capturing that energy and creativity and doing something that actually is super positive.
I think I would mention there is a kind of repetitiveness of proposals, for example, even from the previous funding round. And I don't see any rules or that rather encourage people to collaborate or to bring together efforts to minimize the spreading of the resources. The voting, and we know the voting and the VCA and the CA process is not perfect. It's not really very efficient. There are a lot of good proposals that can fail and others repetitive proposals that can work, the system can pass. We know that. But at least by forcing collaboration or discouraging repetitiveness, maybe I would like to see, for example, in a VCA, one of the criteria could be that, for example, if there is other proposals, or if they are trying. I know that it can be kind of forcing people to work together. Would it really bring a good result? Probably, but if there is a way to encourage people to work together, to collaborate, that would minimize the waste.
I like it when you state it that way, minimizing the waste, because I think there is a lot of, like, when I go through, I see like so many similar proposals, so many different teams doing something that's just a little bit different. And yeah, there is a lot of wasted effort, I think, especially when they're directly competitive and only one of them can win. Then one team puts in all this effort and loses. That seems like a terrible waste as well, of talent, ideas, and creativity.
Yeah, I honestly, I wish that a lot of proposals, they can combine forces if it's similar, right? Easy way to do this is open sourcing something if it's a technical proposal, and they can collaborate to build it together. And you know, like I tried to do this by reaching out to other proposals that do something similar, but then it's up to them to also want to collaborate, right? And there's no mechanism for that right now. The rule is, for example, proposals in the same challenge cannot rate other proposals in the same challenge. But there's no option to, to give, actually there is an option to give feedback in a comment stage, but right, as a comment, as a public comment, or even privately, like through DMs and reaching out. Yeah. But somehow the rule is missing the point, right? I understand why it's there, right? Yeah. Otherwise, anyone can just go on the challenge and mark everybody else as one, 111, right? Just to lift yourself up. Like, where's time for that? But you know, so it discourages the negative, but there's nothing for the positive, right? To release the creativity in a positive direction.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I think that is like a low-hanging fruit. Right? It doesn't take a lot to implement. Proposals can go and give feedback and so on. They can just check a box. Hey, I'd love to collaborate with you.
That
Right?
would be amazing. Like build it into idea scale where you can say, want to collaborate, here's
Yep.
how to contact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I
mean-
would in fact add that from what I have seen in the last, since the beginning, the competitiveness has taken a precedence over collaboration. In fact, competing is kind of more encouraged than being collaborating. But the idea of catalyst is to collaborate, to create something really good with the effort of all of us, not just a few.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what I see, almost the stress levels and all these things come because of the competitiveness is much more more emphasized or more taking precedence over collaboration. So this would be really a very good thing to discuss, to really to decrease the stress level also that's happening in Catalyst.
Mhm. That brings me to the thought around competitive exclusion or success to the successful, which is kind of related as well. Just to go over the trap. If winners of a competition are systematically rewarded with the means to win again, reinforcing feedback loop is created, which, if allowed to proceed uninhibited, the winners eventually take all while the losers are eliminated. And it's not to that extent yet that I see in Catalyst, but I do see that successful proposers have a much higher chance of winning their next proposal in the next fund because they have reputation, people trust them, but it's also reinforcing kind of this is success to the successful. And at one point we talked about how do we build reputation systems so that those who have good reputations get rewarded more. But that because of this systems trap, I'm thinking that may actually be a little dangerous. So how does a new person to the community with really great ideas actually get in, because all the funds are going to all these already successful projects and people. And we start to become less inclusive and less diverse. And so that balance is really interesting to me. Like, and there may be ways of dealing with that. Like the way out here talks about diversification and being able to start another game. Strict limits on the fraction of the pie any one winner can win, like kind of like antitrust laws, policies that level the playing field. And some thoughts along those lines could be maybe proposals should be anonymous. So then you can't bias towards successful people, but you merit it purely on the description and the idea. That might be a way to level the playing field. But maybe it's good to have some level of reputation and all that. So it's a tough question. I don't know what the answers are, but it is something that I'm seeing happen.
Yeah, we did discuss this quite in depth in the after town hall for diversity, equity, inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to this one quite a bit as a newcomer to Catalyst, a new proposal, first time proposer, right? Without a proof of reputation. And at the same time, as you know, and this is I'm thinking, what is realistic, right? What is not realistic? What is practical? Right. So, for example, having unconscious bias workshops to teach people, teach CAs or voters or whoever, right? Just, I think this is good for the whole community, actually, to identify their own bias, right? Especially when it comes to newcomers um, uh, or different logical fallacies when they think about proposals and read through and rate. Just because, and being able to remove like a lot of the comments on our proposals, right, in terms of feasibility, auditability, was, hey, we don't know you, and we don't know if you can pull it off, right? You know, and I'm like, yeah, that's totally fair. Let's get to know the community, and we'll host breakout rooms, and we'll share the full technical detail publicly. We have nothing to hide. So like there's definitely bridges that any party within the community can do to, you know, alleviate some of the traps of success to the successful. Success to successful is inherently not wrong. Like if you have a proven team that keeps their promises, right, and is able to deliver a successful project that grows the community and so on, right? That's what we want in Catalyst. But it shouldn't come to at the cost of excluding people based on their non-existent reputation. So I don't think Catalyst is like this, but it can be. It definitely is like actually Catalyst. When I read this chapter, just real quick, right, fully, I think it faces all the traps, right, all of them. So it's really important that we think through and talk through all of this.
We have already the repetition system. The successful proposals are repetition. They build repetition. We have already that. But I'm just asking if we build a much more robust repetition system, for example, that takes much more than now we have only one single parameter. But if we have a system that takes much more than that, wouldn't it make this better? I'm just asking.
Can you expand a little bit on?
For example, right now, from what I see in Catalyst, that most of the kind of the parameters are very limited to, for example, to certain geographical area, to certain subjects, to certain people, and only include only those. But if we include others, for example, I have raised this issue, for example, before also. If we take, for example, geography, repetition, for example, a repetition in Germany probably might be the same as in Japan, for example, or in Africa, or somebody who has done a very good job in Latin America probably might not be. Well, I know some of the repetition is also documenting or much more technical, but some of them can be much more fluid. So if we can design, if Catalyst can be designed in such a way that builds a reputation from different sources and taking different approaches, might make the reputation system much more robust to just now we have only one system. That is, if one is successfully funded, then that's the reputation or parameter that's being used by the community. But we can use many more parameters
Yeah, and I think we are seeing that reputation system being very effective in bringing success to the successful. I think it was Yoram and Raz did a breakdown and a study of the top funded proposers. And if you look at the top 20, they have captured a certain percentage of Catalyst funding through time. And it was a large number. It was like a surprising amount. And some of them are names you recognize, like it's the DC Spark has a lot of different proposals and they keep getting funded. Anything related to Swarm and the different stuff that Swarm does tends to get funded. And it's starting to grow. And so that's kind of self-reinforcing. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to look at other reputation sources and mechanisms, but I'm curious, can you think of any concrete things we could implement?
I usually think, for example, geography can be I'm thinking you're thinking about developer side, but often I'm more in social setting, in community building, for example. Geography could be a very good parameter, for example.
How would that work in practice?
For example, this, let's say we have, for example, Africa Fund for Cardano for Africa, or Cardano, Grow Cardano for Africa. And something I've seen is that it is the funding is concentrated in one area. It's the way of the system. The system really makes it that easier for people from some geographical area to have to do that. But if we can put a parameter that it should be distributed, that the funding has to be distributed evenly, for example, at least much better than now, that would force force us to see the repetition of other people, or why, or
right. So just to put it even more concretely, you would support having Grow Indonesia, Grow Cardano, Grow Philippines, Grow Cardano, and kind of distribute the funds much more geographically.
Even within the countries also we can do that. We can I was thinking about this, and for example, one of the things that we need to really force people to collaborate within, even within countries, within continents, within the funding. If we force people to collaborate so that they do, we need these funds to be distributed as possible. So if they don't collaborate, then the funds will be concentrated in one strong area where there are strong presence. But if they collaborate, and if they have to take into account that distribution to the population, with regard to the population, then we'll have people will be forced to really distribute, to bring or to include others, not only the system, but people will be forced to include others, to collaborate and to bring others from other areas, not just have the funds for themselves, for example. I haven't thought really deeply about that, but I was just maybe that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think some of this will become really important when we start talking more about Voltaire and even governance.
Mm.
Like, it's not just funding, but if we move into the governance stage, how do we include diverse voices around the world and not avoid kind of the successful voices to run our governance structures?
One of the solutions for tragedy of commons was privatizing it, right? Which means kind of like let people buy in. Like you have one plot of land, you have 1% of total funding, pretty much, and the owners who want a piece of the land, who are asking for funding, they have to buy it, and depending on however they do, then they reap the rewards, right? In a Catalyst sense, unless you privatize Catalyst completely and make it like a venture capitalist system, probably not practical. But how about create a system where funding is the actual delivery of the funding is based on the key metrics. For example, I'll give you 30% of the funding for deploying this on testnet, right? And then 50% when you deploy it on mainnet. And for example, for developed ecosystem, could be I will give you $1 for each user, for example, after that, until it hits 100%, right?
That would negate the idea of intention, rather, a return of intention. That would be return of return, or return of investment instead of return of intention. Catalyst is not an investment. People are funded for the intentions. So if you say that you have to show result to get funded, then that really drive out a lot of good.
Yeah, I hear you. Just an idea, right? How to privatize and solve the tragedy of commons from the book. It could be, hey, I'll give you 80% for the intention, 20% for delivery, or whatever the percentage may be, or nothing, right? How much do we value the idea more than delivery at some point, right? That question will come. And in this way, you would probably fund a little bit more proposals and people. And see which one actually delivers, regardless of reputation, right? Nori, were we supposed to put the? No, it's fine. I think it's fine.
The notes are starting to spread out. It was arranged in columns and rows, but
Gotcha.
I just wanted to make it easier for people to follow the different systems traps notes as we add more and more. So I just color coded each trap and made the stickies that related to them the same color. So yeah, feel free to add stickies. Keep adding notes. Yeah, I think privatizing is an interesting thing, because that's definitely one of the ways the book talks about dealing with the tragedy of the commons. But what does that look like in the realm of Catalyst when it's decentralized? And I guess part of what we're doing is especially with the catalyst voting, we are kind of voting based on how much ADA you have. And that's a form of privatization, I think, maybe. I don't know. Do you agree?
Not really, because the resource is still like you're voting based on the power of your wallet. However, you're not paying for it yourself, right? The whole point of privatization is the actors themselves are paying for the land or contributing to increase of the public pool. In this case, it's catalyst funding. So, one of my proposals is about bringing private institutions and private funding to partner with public funding to fund projects that contribute to the common pool, which is open source projects, for example. And it could be, climate, it could be anything. It doesn't just have to be open source, but arguably right now going to like rule beating with the one ADA, one wallet type of voting, right? If I'm like really, really, really rich right now, and I'm like a super whale, I could go in and single-handedly decide the allocation of the whole catalyst funding, right? And I can decide which proposals I get funded and which don't, just by voting yes or no. That is not very lucrative, I would say, to outside investments, right? And ultimately will drive the catalyst to depend on just one funding source, which is the Cardano Foundation. And I assume that their stake pool, their stake is generating the catalyst funding, right? Each round and round. But yeah, what if there's a method and a way that you can prioritize the funding of common public goods that benefit everyone? Like the example of open source, you look at, Linux, for example, is completely open source. Red Hat is not, right? Red Hat is making a ton of money on their solution, but they contribute like thousands of companies, actually, Oracle, Microsoft, they all contribute to the Linux and all their different kernels and so on, repositories, because at some point, somewhere, somehow down the road, right, they have enterprise solutions based on this fundamental open source infrastructure, and they even donate time and money. And in that way, they build their own reputation in the open source community, and keep it alive and grow it. And many companies benefit, right? Even us startups, if we want to get into that space. So yeah, Gitcoin has done this really, really well with kind of to create a voting mechanism, quadratic voting and funding, right? Quadratic voting that relates to quadratic fund matching to incentivize bigger companies and bigger institutions to donate like these successful projects like DC Spark, like Emergo, like IOG, to fund the whole ecosystem, because they are already making cash, like serious money from the public goods, and it's in their best interest to keep it alive, to fund it, to maintain it, And in this way, I think you can very effectively grow the common pool of the catalyst funding.
I
I'm
think
sorry,
that-
I just wanted to pop in and say, I'm sorry that I've missed this. I had a call from my daughter and we're involved in this suit that I had to file in Malaysia, and it's just, very stressful and difficult. So I just had to deal with, she's coming to some very important realizations, and, it's time for family. So sorry about that.
no worries, Dan.
I'm sorry if I missed anything. Is there any main topic that we're trying to touch on right now?
Kind of talking about the systems traps and how they may relate to Catalyst. We're kind of understanding that all of them could apply in some ways, and looking at the ways out of these traps and how we might have some either low-hanging fruit or directions that we could take as Catalyst to help avoid some of these traps.
Cool. That's a very good intention there, for sure.
Mhm.
Have you come up with anything, any tidbits of wisdom that's come out here?
We talked a little bit about the competitive exclusion or success to the successful, and a lot of stuff went around how can we build up greater collaboration rather than competition. A little bit around maybe some training around unconscious bias workshops and how to remove bias on proposals. And then geographic parameters might be a way to help distribute funds more around the world, rather than say a lot of the funds probably go towards groups that are very Western centric or European centric or US centric.
Right. Right, yeah.
As their success and their head start kind of builds, do we leave out people who are coming new to the community from other places?
Right. Yeah, well, all of those things seem to have to do, to me, with collaboration. It's about how do we coordinate ourselves and organize our intentions and collectivize our, and I mean, kind of try to pull out this notion of a collective intention. There are lots of intentions there, but the collective ones are the ones that I think we vocalize just the very catalyst definition that, we're trying to maximize the potential for human collaboration. That's a statement of, what our big intent is. And it covers all those things, like the geographical distribution of things. That certainly maximizes collaboration. And I don't know, this is why I get kind of caught up in it, because I so deeply believe that this trying to help the world become a more collaborative environment and build tools that can help us understand what collaboration means. I mean, it's only, the past decade or so that we've even had conversations between billions of people. How do you negotiate that? How do you this is a new time, boy, we really need some new tools.
Now, one thing that I think Nin brought up was an idea scale. One really easy thing could be, on any proposal, have a field where anybody can say, oh, I'd love to collaborate. And the proposers get a link to all these people that want to collaborate with them.
Yeah, that's a good idea. In fact, I tried to do that in Fund 7. I realized, wow, there's lots of people here that really should be working together, but we don't even know each other. So I called a bunch of them up, and we drafted this thing we called a synergy proposal, or a synergy extension to my proposal. And that was basically a statement that's saying, hey, what I'm doing is really compatible with what they're doing, and I commit in my proposal to support and engage with this group in order to build the potential for that synergy. In the absence of a statement like that, I don't know if it would even, it might look like collusion to be, engaging and spending money with others that have not, they're not part of the original proposal. So I wanted to make it really, transparent that, there are these proposals that are very, if you do one, that's fine. If you do the other, that's fine. But if you do them both, you get 10 times the potential, potentially you could get 10 times the potential. I'm always looking for synergies. That's just kind of been my life, and to see the lack of it in Catalyst in general seems to me, that's frustrating. It's just frustrating to me.
Yeah. Might be nice to actually have a formal phase in the fund process where before proposals are finalized, proposers are encouraged to look at across the spectrum and say, what are all the projects here that you could collaborate with? Have those meetings, have those conversations, and then rewrite all the proposals to include all those new networks and connections and different.
Exactly. That's exactly why I have been proposing this collaboration environment that happens 24/7 all the time, to help build the potential for the internal collaboration between the community members who don't even know each other. But you have to learn and learn your community and learn and build the potential for working together before you even start building a proposal. I mean, if you don't do that, your proposal is going to be limited by the few people that are engaged in the process. So, I just believe that the system has flaws in that way, because you don't start with the system's perspective. You start with this, well, I got three or four friends that can, think through this idea with me, and let's propose it. And, that's starting small. That's starting with kind of these limitations, or, basically scarcity. If you start with this collaborative model, and you start with the abundance, at least the abundance that's within the community. Anyway, this frustrates me, obviously, so I'm sorry if I get on a soapbox about it.
You made a very good point.
Yeah.
I don't know how long this conversation has been going on. I think I missed almost an hour of it, but I appreciate you guys getting together, and I would love to join again if we're going to continue these.
Yeah, we're having these about once a month, and after this we'll pick a new book. And
Okay.
This month it was systems thinking. I think the group wanted to do design thinking next, so we're going to try to find some books that talk about design thinking.
I'm all for that. If there was a vote, I would vote for that. I think there's actually some differences in, just to make a comment about that. I think there's some fundamental differences that we have to establish and define, differences between design thinking and collaborative design thinking. And the reason I say that is that we don't yet know how to work in groups. I mean, you can, as an individual, sit and look at a problem, maybe with a group of people, of a handful of people, and say, well, these are ways that we can think about this design. But how do you do that in a collective sense? And I think there's probably some very fundamental differences. And me and a colleague are working on a project that defines kind of a paradigm around that collective design thinking. I mean, we call it the person-planet process, and we have a bunch of interesting, we were trying to be as graphical as we can. I mean, obviously there's text around it too. And it's just a distillation of kind of collective wisdom, or, from wisdom traditions around how do we work together as people. So yeah, I would engage in that. I would love to do the design thinking sessions.
Dan, you brought up one point previously. It was about collaboration and abundance, right? In a scarce resource environment, everybody wants to compete and get more.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's the nature of scarcity, right? You're thinking you don't have enough, right?
Right. But in a world where the common pool resources are abundant, there should be more and more collaboration. Like, heck, when you think about, at the end of the day, Catalyst funding is completely free. It's a free grant, right?
Yeah.
And okay, well, I tried to reach out to people to collaborate, and some of them said yes, and they told me, okay, to collaborate, I need XYZ amount. I just added that amount to the proposal amount. Deal, we get funded, you're right. Right. It's like,
I think the problem here is that, you're right, that you're right that the environment it kind of speaks about abundance, the problem is that we don't think about abundance. And I think we as individuals have to kind of become used to living in a community that's abundant. This is something that drilled into my head with Bucky from years and years, is that, you know, we don't, living in scarcity is part of the problem, and thinking in scarcity has to change.
Is there a way to integrate that into the mechanism of, for example, Catalyst in practical terms?
Yeah, it has to be incorporated into kind of the way you work.
I mean, is there a way you know how to integrate that? Because right now we are, as you said, that we are really functioning in a normal way, or a normal that is a scarce way of thinking. That's how we function.
Right.
But is there a process or a mechanism that where we can shift that towards the abundance system? Do you know?
Well, I think there is. At least I have you can imagine an environment, a collaborative environment that everyone engages in and is involved in. And its purpose is to gather the resources of the community and show and demonstrate that abundance in building proposals. Once those proposals that have come out of, and it has to be a continuous process. I think part that's broken in Catalyst is that we kind of split it up into these pieces and, you know, run to try to get your proposal done. And then, but there's this grouping of collaborative community resources is a step that's been skipped. And it's so important to have that first sense of abundance of the community and change that perception. It's really a different paradigm, saying that, well, we're starting with abundance, and here's the community that you join. Go and look for proposals that are interesting for you and the things you can add to. Where can you add value? Where are the real serious problems, and try to collect that at collective intention, and then build your proposals. And you build the proposals from all the resources in the community, from the, not just the funding, from all the guys who really know how to do budgets, and the guys who really are great at timelines, and other people who are just really good idea guys, and someone who just want to execute and, you know, be using the kind of the variety and the you know, abundance that we have in different personalities that are working in different ways to build better things. You know, collaboration isn't just about, you know, working with somebody. It's about sharing the abundance that's in the community.
I think the challenge of that, though, will be, you know, ownership. Who owns what, right? The project, and the success of a proposal will be is highly dependent on the sense of ownership, taking, you know, something from idea to reality.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that it's not possible. I think it's, you know, just, hey, I want to collaborate and I need XYZ to collaborate, right? I would love to, and then we connect, great. And that would be like a way to do it from the very beginning, but we should enable collaboration after the proposals get funded, right? In in the open source world, it's pretty simple. Hey, we have an open source project. Please come in and collaborate. And by the way, we got funded for the proposal, so I'm gonna create a bounty, open source bounty, you know, 5,000, 10,000, or could be bounty for documentation, could be bounty for creative financial plan or marketing plan or whatever plan for this, right? Or actually build it out, and share the resources that we got from Catalyst or from wherever, with whoever wants to actually do the work, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah, I guess that whole notion of ownership is an important element of this. And ownership really, to me, means it's about your initiative in doing stuff. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and it's my sense of ownership is only because, hey, I got up to bat, and I kept trying, and that kind of embodied a sense of ownership. So from the collective sense, I think it's those people who are really driving for a project to get to some completion, and engaging those people are the ones who basically earn a greater proportion of the reward, not necessarily financial reward, but, you know, credit for doing the good things that they're doing. And so I don't see any conflict in that. I think certainly we need to have collaboration between existing proposals where we see that synergy. But also I think there are ways, and I've kind of proposing this as a methodology, is that in a 24/7 collaboration platform that anyone can engage and involve themselves in, their very engagement and involvement earns them the kind of the rope or the ownership, effectively. You're buying into this idea, and you're contributing your time and space and ideas, and that should be proportional to your engagement. And that can all be measured. And an online platform can be measured by how much time you spend on this thing, how many ideas are you contributing, or what element of drive are you what level of value are you adding. And that can even be financial. I mean, somebody comes in and says, I'm going to put some money into this, then that can be part of the whole thing. So I think ownership, even the concept of ownership, has to change somewhat, because ownership in the past has been largely based upon a scarcity model. How can I own this because I believe I need to get enough for myself and my family. I don't know. It's not an easy question, of course. This is going to take years and years for us to settle down as human compatible, collaborative group. But you got to start somewhere, and I think Cardano's been a great source for the beginning of that.
I have a question to Nin. You mentioned this quadratic voting in. What do you think? Is it you are thinking about the proposals that generate from outside sources get that the quadratic part from the catalyst, or those who get from catalyst they should get from the enterprise funders?
The quadratic voting and funding proposal, essentially the whole point of that is, with the current voting system, right, it's extremely hard to increase the abundance thinking and the common pool of resources, right? So people look at, okay, there's only $1 million in this challenge, or there's only $60 million in the whole catalyst, and ultimately just one source of funding. So because of one ADA, one vote, where even the almost 50% of the community, catalyst community, I think Danny shared 48% were concerned with the well effect in voting, right? Like a well can come in, just single-handedly decide what can and will not get funded. It's extremely hard to go to other foundations beyond Cardano foundations, like the Mozilla Foundation, the any open source foundation, and ask them, hey, can you give me maybe a couple million to add to the funding, the common pool funding that we have to drive more innovation? And then say, okay, how does the process work? What have you guys funded? What is the return on investment? What are we actually doing? And how does a innovation funding get decided, and how does it get distributed? And you tell them, hey, it's based on the amount, the wallet size, and they'll say no amount, right? So you're essentially limited to only the foundations and organizations that believe that one ADA, one vote is the right way, versus the quadratic voting and funding. It prevents and limits one actor, one bad actor to come in. It essentially relies on benevolent wells, just like Cardano Foundation is a benevolent well. This is one example, right? And similar, can be institution, can be individuals that want to donate to the whole ecosystem, but they don't necessarily have time themselves to go one by one, right? Like Charles, he probably doesn't have time to go one by one and you know, vote on proposals himself, right? So he wants to delegate this work to the votes of the community, and the quadratic system, it just limits how much one person can put on one proposal alone. Right? If you want to connect, happy to explain further, but
I know quadratic voting. I wasn't clear
okay.
over. You mean, for example,
Quadratic funding.
You quadratic funding. You mentioned, for example, enterprises engaging. For example, DC Spark raising money from outside sources or from its own sources, so that the rest of the funding comes from the Catalyst or vice versa. That's what I was not clear over.
Yeah, for us, once we implement and build a platform, the first people that we will be approaching to be one of our quadratic fund matching partners is the successful projects on Cardano, because they have gotten funding when they started from the common pool resource. If let's say you go to a farmer that got a grant to start his own business, right, and now he's a successful business owner, and you ask them, hey, would you like to donate to people like you that started before, right, and partner with the community, decide which projects get the most funding, right, based on the amount of impact that they create. That's a much easier conversation. And you will effectively diversify the source of funding from one benevolent whale to many different. Doesn't have to be whale, can be a bear or whatever animal. And I think it goes back to the abundance thinking, right? That there's hope that the common pool is gonna grow. And there's hope that we can collaborate and all of this. Like, if it would be a different conversation if the Catalyst total funding would be 32 million or even 64 million or 100 million, right? Proposals can ask for as much as they need. For example, they would collaborate and form teams to build massive and huge projects, right? It's a different level of governance.
All right, we're about 2 minutes away from being here an hour and a half. So I want to try to limit us to 90 minutes, just so that people who are watching this asynchronously, thank you for joining our conversation in a different space and time. And we've left this recording behind for you to enjoy. But yeah, thanks everybody for participating today. And I'm gonna stop the recording here and wrap things up. Just for next time, we are looking a little bit at design thinking rather than systems thinking. And then maybe talk a little bit about how they differ and how they can actually work together. That might be an interesting way to go. So on the Leadership Academy book club chat, we'll select which design thinking book we want to read. So if you know of any good ones, please do post links there. I have a few that I've pulled out that I think might be interesting, but I'd love to source from the community any design thinking books that you think would be interesting to read too. And we can do a quick vote there and pick something. And then we'll meet in about a month to give people enough time to acquire the book and read it. And then we can dive in. But yeah, thanks for participating today. And we will pause the recording here, but I don't want to end the conversation